Yeah.
Hey everybody, Dave Whitmarsh. Hang on. Dave Whitmarsh from Whitmarsh Consulting Group, and we're joined on the last session of the day, 4 o'clock here, Eastern Time Zone. And what time are you, Em?
6 a.m. It's dark outside, and it's a cold winter's morning in Sydney.
In Sydney, Australia. So I'm super thankful to have your presence, and always love to connect with you. And today, we are going to stretch our imaginations on how learning AI is been impacted in the learning space, and Em has some just amazing examples of what they've done, and really look forward to sharing this session with you all. And I'll kick it over to you, Em, and I'll be here bounce things up and answer some questions, but it's all yours.
Fabulous. I'm very thrilled to be here, David, and chatting with your community. Always good to kind of share ideas and share perspectives. So yeah, great to be here today. So we're going to be talking about AI and learning, and of course that's a huge topic. huge topic. And I also wanted to talk about some of the risks or some of the fears or thoughts that might come up for people when they start thinking about AI in learning. And we're just going to, I kind of wanted to kick off with that and get people thinking about, well, when someone says to you, let's start using AI in learning, what do you think?
Well, after sitting through some sessions today, I think that some of the things that came up were security was always an issue. Where's my data? What's it going to be used for? What are they really going to know? Right down to, is this going to work? What sort of, even, skepticism on one side, just like, what has our company got us into? And so, one of the reasons for this whole event was just to help bring some clarity to the space, right? So I think we've done a pretty good job at that, and looking forward to your additions.
Yeah. And one of the interesting things is that I think because AI technology evolves so quickly and there's so many different facets of it, it can be difficult to know where to start. So partly that's what I wanted to bring to the conversation today, a pathway that people can choose to start, but there's certainly multiple pathways where you can get involved in this. We're not going to spend a lot of time today talking about data and security and privacy. I'm hoping, has that been covered off at all today, David? Has there been other people?
It's been mentioned, but I wouldn't say button down, but it's definitely been mentioned.
And one of the things that I would strongly encourage is partner with others. So we have tech partners, and they specifically coach, guide, show me how to get on top of all the security requirements. So what I would say is, one of the things when you start on this journey, it's not a journey you have to undertake on your own. So my background is, and David, you might remember this from previous conversation, my background is in textile design. So my degree is in specializing in weaving. That's woven structure, fabrics, the whole thing, nothing even to do with learning. I started in the learning space around 20 years ago now. And we've got into the learning technology space and specifically working with chatbots and AI probably in the last 5 years. And so for anyone out there in learning that's thinking, I know nothing about this isn't me, we're learners. Hey, that is our job. We can actually learn this stuff. And because of that, I think we have a very valuable perspective to bring into the tech community. So let's commence. Oh, I thought I better mention, David, a little bit about me. I knew, lovely introduction, but I did think I should just mention. So I started my business coming up for 19 years ago now.
Wow.
When I moved from London to Sydney, Australia, I've written a couple of books along the way, very lucky to be able to speak to a lot of different people around the world. We have a lot of people using our turning learning into action methodology. And as I mentioned, it's really in the last 5 years that we've started to take all that we've learned through our 20,000 plus one-on-one conversations and actually program that into our chatbot, which is what we're of course here to share about today. So, and if anyone has any further questions about me, happy to answer those, and people feel free to reach out and connect if you'd like to find out more or, you know, share stories. So one of the things when I was looking at, you know, preparing for today, when I was thinking about AI, is really thinking about, well, what's my journey been with technology? And funnily enough, back in 1981, showing my age here, and there's probably a lot of people that would listen into this that maybe can't relate to 1981, but David, do you recognize this? The ZX81, I think it was made by a British company, so I'm not sure whether they were in the US.
I was born like after that. No, I'm just teasing. So I don't recognize that. I don't at all. I would have been in grade 7 at the time, but so over in the US, that would have probably been Commodore 64 back then.
This was the pre-runner to the Commodore 64.
Wow.
The equivalent to the Commodore 64 was actually the ZX Spectrum. You can still see this is called the ZX81. There was then the ZX Spectrum, which was on the market at the same time as the Commodore. So this was a computer earlier than the Commodore.
Wow.
Okay. And my dad was obsessed with home computing, and he taught me to write a 4-line program on the ZX81. And absolutely bless him, he passed 4 years later in 85. And really my computing education actually stopped dead at that point, David. And I could quite say I didn't really get back into technology till about 5 years ago. And I was reminded of back in, you know, the early 80s, when I was pictured in the paper at school for being able to write code, 4-line code, but was teaching other people in my class. So my journey has gone a long way in technology in a very slow period of time. But this is the fascinating thing. The ZX81 had one KB of memory. Ridiculous. And look, this is what I carry around, and this is not even including my iPad. And I'm rarely without these devices. And I think you'll find that's 156 billion as we are looking at this data. So if you think, this is why technology is so important now, because we have so much with us the whole time about our person. And so really that has enabled the whole technology space just to completely come alive. We know Moore's law, we know that data, we just have so much data that is available to us now, and that we can access and that we can use. So one of the interesting things is there's just so many topics that are available to us within technology and even within artificial intelligence. And if we think about, you know, a practical definition for AI, it's a computer system able to perform tasks normally requiring human intelligence. Yeah, so it's kind of like a machine. But that's kind of almost the layman's definition of AI, of kind of giving us something to hang on into our hats. AI itself, even in amongst the tech community, there's kind of a lot of discussion of what is AI, what isn't AI, what's narrow AI, what's broad AI, true AI. And a guy I recommend people check out is Daniel Hume. I'm going to spell that. It's Daniel, then Hulme. And he's the Director of Business Analytics from University College London. And he really will open our eyes about what's coming with AI and true AI in the future. Now, today I wanted to be much more practical and talk about things that people can absolutely implement. But I think one of the things that I've learned in the last 5 years journey, and I certainly learned this from Daniel, is to really question, when someone says something is AI, what do they actually mean? I kind of get under the hood of, well, what is it doing and how does it work? because that will help you inform your decisions. I was also speaking to a company in London that were doing work with algorithms and AI, and one of the young designers there said to me, their most effective algorithms are the ones that they can actually explain. The ones that are very complicated to explain are a lot, she just said that kind of they're not as effective. So I think sometimes we don't ask questions on AI because we kind of think, well, you know, black box, what's happening inside it? But actually, the more you ask questions, the more it can be understood, the more, the easier, and, you know, risk-free is one of my titles in the talk today, the less risk you may have within that. Does that make sense, David? Have similar things been said today? And I'm sorry for missing earlier presentations. I was clearly asleep.
Right. No, that makes total sense. Absolutely. Yeah. No, your summary of the technology is incredibly frightening and accurate all at the same time, having lived through it.
Okay, good to know. Good to know. And you know, hopefully useful, because part of this is we need to get people that are not AI specialists into this space, comfortable and confident using this kind of technology.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the other things that I thought is interesting is if you think about AI actually kind of mimicking humans or doing something that would normally require human input, humans are so complex. There's so many different parts to humans. So within the kind of AI landscape, we have, you know, AI that can help us with vision, AI that can help us with translation and languages. We've got things like, you know, AI and robotics that, you know, either replacing a limb or doing the same sort of instruction as a limb. I was also thinking about things like, you know, in our homes, the type of AI that we actually have within our homes that actually help us do our human kind of type things. We've also got, you know, the autonomous vehicle whole piece that is coming around. So partly when you're thinking about what am I using my AI for, it's about thinking, okay, which human skill or behavior am I actually either replicating or augmenting? And we'll go on to talk about a bit more about augmenting the AI with. Okay, so when we think about learning, a lot of the time it's going to be about speech and conversation. Which is why probably the most prominent place that learning and AI will come in is in this natural language processing place and things like chatbots. And then underneath here, we've got machine learning, which kind of goes across everything. But here's an interesting thing, David. What I think we, even 3 or 4 years ago, were calling AI could actually be very narrow AI. And there's a sort of, you've got your automation with human learning, and then you've got your machine learning. Okay. And one of the things I really want to challenge people thinking about today is that automation with human learning can actually be a really great and a strong step forward to then start to build on, then going into your machine learning piece. Has there been much talk today about automation at all, David?
Oddly enough, not much. No. We had one session which I'm working on that's we're going to try to do a case study based off of something as simple as performance feedback and using traditional methods versus AI. But other than that, not a ton.
Okay. And so I think this is the whole thing. A lot of the time, and an automated kind of chatbot could be seen as a very narrow AI. And often I think it's kind of quite well accepted that some of the best AIs that we use are very narrow, because the narrower you can actually make it, the easier it is for the AI to succeed and excel in its own realm, rather than trying to be all things to all people.
That makes a lot of sense.
If we consider something like, I won't say the name because it's sat just behind me, so I'll pretend it's an Alexa, which it's not, it's one of the other ones. But if you think about something like that, if that's in everyone's home, that has to be have really broad knowledge. Yeah? But if you've designed something for learning transfer and that is your specialist area, then it's narrow to learning transfer. It's not trying to answer the question, what color is the sky?
Right.
Because it's not designed for that. So I'm sorry, I'm digressing here because I kind of think this is all interesting information to sort of pull into the background here when we're thinking about what technology we're choosing and what we're choosing AI for. So I'm going to backtrack to make sure we stay on track. So mostly in learning, it's around conversation. And that's why we opted to work in the space of chatbots, because of course, chatbots simulate they're a conversational interface.
Yeah. Hey, I'm sorry, I'm going to jump in, but what you say about having the focus makes a lot of sense, right? So AI in HR hasn't been as effective as I think it should be, or where it should be in the space. And truthfully, I think it's probably more of the vendors that pushed it early without clear definition of what it was capable of, and then the audience also not understanding what the limitations were, and I think it gave it a bit of a bad name, right? And so, if I can sort of understand where you're going here, you know all AI doesn't, it's not something that's built for everything. But what you've done is what you've done and around conversation intelligence and the training, and you really, I so hope I didn't take your next 3 slides out of context.
No.
But really, but you've built expertise, and that is exactly how the AI should be used right now. Right?
Yeah. And David, one of the interesting things is 2 or 3 years ago now, I started to go to chatbot conferences. So I'm a big conference fan. I will be practically at any conference I can get to. So I started to go to chatbot conferences. And one of the things they were saying in the chatbot conference is that the holy grail of chatbots is to have a chatbot that can talk to someone in conversation for 20 to 30 minutes. I thought, well, that's interesting because that's what we're doing. Now, the reason that people at the chatbot conference thought that was so unlikely and almost impossible is because they don't have experience in conversation and structured conversation and different types of conversation. They have experience in chatbots. And this is why I think it's so exciting as we get learning people inspired to actually step into this space, that when we bring learning and HR, when we bring our knowledge and our expertise in it and start working then truly and deeply with the technology, we can create some really, really great things.
Yeah.
So we're going to be talking mostly today about chatbot technologies. So I am not a broad AI specialist. And in fact, if you talk to Daniel would argue that true AI isn't even here yet. Like it's not even really commercialized, yet alone even really developed. So this is why the word AI becomes a bit of a sort of a misnomer. And I would be really getting people to say, actually, not necessarily what is the technology, but does it solve a problem that you have got? And does it actually give you the outcomes that you're looking to get? Because at the end of the day, it's not about the shiny technology, it's about the outcomes that you're trying to achieve. So I thought, let's just kick off and think about, where do we have AI in our lives, and how do we kind of just regularly bump up against it? So of course, we've got things like customer service chatbots that pop up either on your screen, on your phone, I would say they are pretty common now. How many times a week, David, would you say you bump up against some kind of customer service chatbot? Would you be able to?
I would say probably on a personal
Yeah,
level, maybe 4 to 6.
yeah,
Now, and I separated personal versus work, because work-wise, I probably stumble across 30 to 40 of some form.
yeah, yeah. And David, I would think that that is pretty high for people because of the space that you're working in. Would you say
Oh, absolutely.
higher than most? Yeah, yeah,
And a lot of times I'm working with um, human capital vendors,
yeah,
or a lot of times I'm looking at marketing tools, and they have it. So
yeah,
I
yeah.
I would think that on the daily, if I was to ask my wife that same question, I would say she'd be lucky to have 1/10 of what I have, right?
Yeah. And even though I still think, 2 or 3 times a week at least, I'm across some kind of customer service chatbot just on the web. Australian Tax Office has one.
Hmm.
The banks, that whole thing of here to help you answer your questions. I think one of the frustrations that comes up for people is they're not quite clear whether it's a chatbot or whether it's a person that's working in a call center environment dealing with multiple conversations at any one time.
Hmm.
Yeah? And so one of my passions is to chatbots become more transparent, because I actually think transparency builds trust. If you know it's a chatbot, you can then have that experience. And then if you can also show this is easily how you get to a person, you're a winner. So that's one of the things that we do in our work. But so customer service now I think is quite common, and it's about answering your questions. I would imagine that in America, more people have the home devices than many other countries. I got mine probably, Trish Yule was encouraging me for ages, and now I don't know how I did without it. Just in terms of answering those questions. But what's interesting when you think of that kind of home device or your Alexa or equivalent, people think they're having a conversation with it, but really it's just a 1 or 2 exchanges and then it resets. It's not actually a conversation, it's giving it instruction. Yeah. And then the third area is health, which I think is very interesting in terms of AI within psychology, things like Wobot. And one of the really fascinating things that I've seen some of the research that's coming out of the US that says veterans who have PTSD, sorry, had better responses rates through working with a chatbot initially than they did working with a therapist. How fascinating is that?
Yeah, it's amazing, really.
Yeah. And this is really, and this is where it becomes where you can actually leverage tools for things that actually are lent to them. And you would think that something as personal as working with a therapist or psychologist is so human based. How could technology do that? But they're leveraging off the power of psychological safety. So very powerful to see what's happening in health. We're going to chat more about that later. But let's think about learning and talent. And also, David, I did want to bring in kind of HR in here because I thought, does HR come under talent or not? I'm going to talk about HR first. Okay. So within HR, I think a lot of people are now starting to embrace information customer service style chatbots that actually help people answer your best kind of or most frequently asked HR questions. And really that's the first stage for chatbots within HR, which will just help cut out a lot of that low value items. If people are at their desk and they find they have that query 5 times a week. one of the interesting things that I heard about when people were looking at where could they do automation, and I think the same question applies to AR, people were trying to use automation for more complicated things because it took them more time. And they were trying to use automation to take those tasks off their plate. The easy tasks that they were maybe doing 5 times a week, but took them perceived no time, they were not looking at those to naturally automate them. However, if you actually, it's probably going to be easier to automate a simple task that you do multiple times that might be very easy and not be difficult for you, but actually you could just clear that off your plate. So I think that's one of the interesting things to think about within HR.
Mm-hmm.
And Dave, would you say onboarding comes within HR or within learning?
That's a really good question. So it falls under a number of different things. So if you're talking about HR structure, learning certainly has a percentage of them. Recruitment has a percentage of them. You'd be very surprised at how many people onboarding falls in under the benefits program.
Okay,
right.
interesting.
So
Yeah.
it's really all over the map, and from being in my space for the last 20 years, it's always been something that's been really hard to target, to be honest with you.
So I think that onboarding is another space that is really ripe for chatbots to come into, because it is such a natural way to support people, and you can actually do it in a really clever, personable fashion. And part of the reason I asked the question, where does it sit? Because in a way, we've created some learning interventions, which is almost, and I'm going to borrow a phrase here from Noli, a learning journey, which you can do with the kind of the chatbot interface. But really, it's like an onboarding journey that you have running through a learning program. Mm-hmm. So, for example, again, this was in the space of mental health. People met the chatbot before they even met the facilitator, and were introduced to what was going to happen in the program. They were sent a video, they were told how it was going to run through the chatbot. And we can easily do that in the space of onboarding. People maybe meet the chatbot before they're even their first day in the office. They're told what to expect. They may have information at values. They may have information from the CEO. Could all be done in a really personal way with the chatbot, and looping in other key stakeholders using the same chatbot pathways. So onboarding HR, really ripe for chatbots also. Agreed. Let's switch to learning though, and what type of chatbots are out there in learning? I think, sorry, beg your pardon, Otto has now been rebranded as Flow, which is a learning pool, chatbot from Learning Pool. And one of the things with kind of, sorry, I'm stumbling just because it's kind of complicated, because it's so broad. And so what you have to, when you're thinking about what your tool is for, something like Flow is designed to help people find within curriculum the best learning path for them. Okay. And so it's almost like a lot of the time when we think of sort of AI and recommendations, we think of things like, Netflix or Amazon that recommends using an algorithm the best product for us based on what we have either watched or what they think we're going to be interested in based on purchases. Yeah. And sometimes it gets it right, sometimes it doesn't. But that's a kind of a recommendation-based AI / whether it's designed as a chatbot or whatever that algorithm fits behind, can really be used within your curriculum to help find the right learning pathways for people.
So when you say that, if I'm hearing that correctly, because that's a bit different verbiage than I've heard. So really, are you suggesting that you can use or index your learning library And then based off of the feedback of what people are looking for, the responses, you can provide resources for them.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
It's not my area of speciality, but it's certainly an area that is being developed. And I would look, I think it's called, I want to say Firefly, coming out of the UK with the guy who's written the book, I think, called AI in Learning. So we might have to loop back into that, David, to actually make sure I get you the correct reference there. The book is published by Kogan Page. If you have a chance to do a bit of a Google while I'm
I got it.
speaking, we may be able to be winners on that one. But yeah, some fascinating stuff being done in that area. It's not my area, but it's certainly an area that you can explore, and that's starting to happen. Another area, and Micah is out of the IBM Watson stable. And that's a kind of a career recommendation, career path, resources chatbot. It's actually internal to IBM. I don't know if they're selling it commercially, but certainly there's an opportunity for kind of the recommendation, career paths, career resources to be done by a chatbot. Again, that's not my area, but I wanted to share examples of what other people are doing in this space as well, of course.
Mm-hmm.
And then the area which I am closer connected to is when you have kind of coaching within learning and AI. Of course, we're working in the space of learning transfer coaching, helping people apply what they've learned when they've been on a training program. But Procter & Gamble have kind of a similar product that they have created in that space as well, again, that they use internally. So you've got to think about, when you're thinking about your AI, where does it actually fit, and really get narrow on the use case that you're going to use it in. And so one of the things that I said up front was that we were going to be talking risk-free today. Anyone that is risk adverse. And my point being here, in a way, if you've got a process that is already working within your organization, and it's like a critical process, if you're going to take AI into that, you're going to need to do a lot of testing, a lot of building out, a lot of kind of proof of concept, all that kind of thing. And possibly that is quite high risk. So if you're starting on your AI journey, you might want to work in an area that you perhaps haven't already got a lot of solutions that are already working, but perhaps in an area where you've not currently got solutions. And so in a way, I actually think learning transfer, and of course, David, I'm biased on this because this is what I have spent, my life working on. But the challenge of learning transfer, it kind of rarely has a workable human solution because it's needed on such large scale. Okay, most organizations probably could not resource professional one-on-one coaching for people following up on learning. And yet they know that that is actually going to give them the best outcome if they could. So if you use something like a learning transfer chatbot, I actually think it's quite low risk because you're not trying to do something which is already being done elsewhere. You're actually solving a problem that wasn't able to be solved before. So because we're talking specifically about learning here, I thought I might get a bit learning geeky and talk about, the shift in learning from inputs, which is what, as learning designers and curriculum designers, we absolutely love, and program designers and learning experience designers. There's a lot of great work done in this space here for all the learning insights, collateral, your delivery methods, your curation of learning, your content. But when it comes down to what is that learning actually producing, what are the outcomes and outputs from that learning, I think that's where we start to often fall over, and we feel that it's out of our control. And kind of my argument is, well, actually, we can use AI or chatbots in that space to actually help us manage, collect data, and create those outputs. And so I actually think this is a relatively risk-free space to do it in. because it's not often tackled well already.
Yeah, when you look at it that way, Emma, it makes perfect sense. And then truthfully, I think most companies don't really address the learning transfer after leadership program
Yeah.
to begin with. So I'm not sure that there's any loss there, right?
Yeah. And that's kind of I mean, when we also talk about risk-free, and David, we should probably mention this now, when we were talking up front, we were sort of saying about the security versus and privacy. All of that needs to be dealt with. But actually, if you've got the right use case, sorting out your data, your security, that's actually just part of doing business.
Right.
Let's not lead AI with data insecurity. Let's find out what business problem is it solving, and then how do we make sure that that is all handled appropriately. The other interesting thing in terms of risk is this whole idea of ethics and making sure that you don't have bias programmed into your AI. And that's a fascinating topic. Probably a little bit above my pay grade in terms of all the ins and outs of it. It's one of the areas that I'm currently educating myself in. But this again is where the kind of human learning behind some kind of narrow AI or automation versus machine learning that potentially is learning on top of itself kind of comes in. So what we've actually decided to do with our work is we have human eyes on every change that we make, and it's alert based to us. So we're kind of getting the machine learning, but we are notified where those changes are going in, and we kind of sense check it all. Now, that's not to say, even humans have bias, so we try and have those eyes of having a bias on it. It's the best we can do to make sure that there's no bias going in. Okay, so remembering here, again, that's a little bit of a side tangent, that we're talking about shifting this context of learning to the outputs. And it's almost, we already know that human coaching would bring a great benefit, or a human coaching based methodology, if we could have that across everyone. So let's look at how we can leverage AI. And especially part of it is if you can agree and get really clear on, well, what do you want your chatbot coach to do? And this is for us where you have to have all things kind of coming together. And so we had a very strong methodology and all our human evidence and human cases, and we were crystal clear as to what we wanted our technology to do because we had all that expertise in the space. So it was very easy then to say, okay, well, that is my expertise. I'm not going to have the technology telling me what it can do. I'm going to say, this is what I want it to do. And we actually then built from here. And you can see here that our version of AI chatbot coaching, it's not about giving advice. It's not about observing someone. So it's not a customer support FAQs chatbot. It's actually getting people to slow down, have a conversation, reflect with themselves. And I don't know, David, you and I have kind of shared this story before, that the whole reason we got into this space is because I was always saying to my human team, remember, when you're working with someone over the phone, it's not about them building a relationship with you. It's about you helping them build a relationship with themselves. It's about them having a conversation with their internal dialogue, thoughts, feelings, values, beliefs, fears, and needs, controlling our behavior. The more you can get people slowing down, reflecting, having that internal meta kind of conversation about what they're thinking, the easier it is to shift behaviors.
Right.
And so when I was saying this, someone on my team said, well, Em, if that really is true, why can't it be done with AI? I went into my bluster of no, never, not in this lifetime, and thought, hang on a second, defensive leader is not a good leader. Let's slow down and actually see what's possible and experiment here. And this is where we kind of came on the journey.
Yeah, and for those folks that have seen this, to be perfectly honest, I've known Emma for, oh boy, what do we have to be coming on 6 years now.
I think it must be.
Yeah, and when I found out that Emma was doing this, I was shocked. right? I was shocked based off of her character. And then in a short conversation, I I I realized why that Emma went in this direction, and because she tested it, open to testing it, and has a proof of concept. And without telling the audience too much, um, I thought your proof of concept and your hesitation was your proof of concept was beyond proof of concept. It to me it was rock solid, and you still were slow trying to figure it out because you wanted to make sure. So
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
so keep this in mind where this is coming from, right? This
Yeah.
is
Would
Emma is not a technology, throw it out there, let's see how it works. She's one of the most conservative people that I know, right? And
yeah. Yeah.
so take that as it is.
And in fact, I was at the Chatbot conference again, an annual one a couple of weeks ago now, and they said if you're putting your product out there without a lot of errors in it, you've spent too long putting your product out. And I thought, well, I would rather get a really good, solid product. So here's 5 factors for embracing AI in learning. And I am very happy to share, the mistakes that I made along the way in a hope that other people are going to be out there kind of creating their own, where's that's their, it could become a new passion. So the first thing that I'm going to challenge people to think about is this whole concept of an analogy thinking, which I think we kind of people use around brainstorming and creativity tasks. And it's really saying, well, what's actually happening in other areas and how can that apply to learning? And it wasn't kind of I don't know about you, David, but I often find as you're going in a new direction or you start working in some way, ideas then tend to collide, don't they? You'll start in one direction and then something else from another direction will then sort of solidify how you're moving. And I was in South Africa doing an internal training program for a client, training their team in turning learning into action methodology. One of the senior managers was doing a MBA at INSEAD. And she took me to side after one session and she said, Em, this turning learning into action methodology you're teaching us, it is really like motivational interviewing, which we have just learned on that MBA. I thought, well, that is fascinating. Let's get to the bottom of this. So motivational interviewing is actually from psychology, and it's a counseling approach for helping people with addiction. But the whole thing is that it's client centers and it's getting people to take ownership for making their own changes, which is, of course, is similar to our principles in learning transfer. We also spoke earlier about that. I talked about the defense study, the US Defense Agency chatbot, which is Ellie. And of course, Wobot is very well kind of used and well loved now. And anyone hasn't experienced Wobot, you can certainly download that for free on your mobile phone. It's for a chatbot for helping people with mental well-being. So I think there's a lot to be said in this space of psychology that we can learn from in learning. And this was an article from earlier on this year that was in an online magazine here in Australia about the counseling industry and psychologist jobs. So, the whole, of course, the headline is prepare for disruption, but when you sort of read underneath that, you can see the amazing work they're actually doing with chatbots within counseling. So don't be afraid when you're thinking about how you're going to bring AI into learning. Think about what are other areas doing? Like, what do we do in learning that could be a bit like customer service? Where do we use things like coaching? I've shared today about coaching chatbots. So think of other AIs and think about how can that apply to us in learning. So the next thing to think about, I think one of these things that often comes up is, oh my goodness, everything's going to be replaced by AI or replacing humans. The key is that it's really about augmenting, taking the best or taking what we do as humans, and then augmenting it with chatbots or whatever type of AI you're talking about. So this was a flow that we designed that we'd been doing with a current client. And this was our technology, Coach M, which is our chatbot technology for learning transfer, actually augmenting with conversations with one of our coaching team. So people in this flow, they had some conversations with Joe and they had some conversations with Coach M. And there's a conversation loop between Coach M and Joe. So each other knows what the other person is saying. So you really, what you can do with that, then you can actually extend your learning transfer journey at a lower cost because you're integrating some AI where you might in the past have had some human. So I'm really excited about this idea of augmentation, and I think that will take us on a whole other journey. So it's about saying, well, what's the correct balance for which program in terms of the actual approach?
Well, and truthfully, Emma, it's also about the belief in the person that's going to ultimately do that spend, right? I've said this, this will be my second time saying it. I'm a 50-year-old man, right? Technology should not come that easy to me. And if I have to buy something, I may not believe in this. Now, if I see an integrated approach, I might be open to it, right? And then once you see it works, then you can maybe the integrated approach isn't for everybody, but having that option, I think, is a really nice touch.
Yeah, and I think even in a chatbot that doesn't have set conversations with a human, we also always make it really clear how can someone get to speak to a person.
Yeah.
So they have a rescue code word if the conversation is stuck, if they're going around in circles, or even they just need a different response. Rescue, and then we get a human person on the end to that. So I think there's
one thing that you have that's brilliant, but another thing, I don't know if you're going to touch on it, but I thought about this for weeks after our last conversation, was when you book those times, you treat it as an appointment, right? It's you book a time with the chatbot. It's not something you just do when you're waiting for a bus, or it's not something, this is a company work issue, money that they've invested in their leadership development programs, and it's being treated as such, right? And I just thought that was wonderful, right? By the fact that you gave it calendar time, to me, gave it credibility, or additional credibility.
Yeah, and the whole thing of actually getting people to slow down and reflect. I think there's a bigger picture than learning transfer, that actually if we can help people to think critically about things and think differently about things, it actually teaches them the value of actually slowing down and thinking. And if we do think about the way automation and AI is affecting our jobs, the sitting down and thinking is what the humans are really going to be required to do, not running around doing 101 tasks in a day.
Right.
So there's a real, there's a drive for me to continue with this work, David. Now we have started. So just looping in here, there's a lot of research around digital coaching, which essentially is coaching via Zoom or with a digital, it's phone now, that actually says there's no difference to face-to-face. And I can't wait till we can get some validated studies. We're negotiating with the right people at the moment to get some studies happening to actually say that, whether it's a chatbot, and it's not that it's as good as a human, it can't be as flexible, but if you're not going to have human, it's a really, really high quality alternative. And also here, some research from 2001, people in digital formats open up easily and are sometimes more open with personal information than during face-to-face. And this leans on the psychological safety again. So it's about augmenting. There's also this idea of augmenting where you're at and where you talk with your chatbot. So for example, I was chatting with someone in Sweden yesterday. They hardly ever use WhatsApp in Sweden. They use Facebook Messenger. So if we were doing a chatbot in Sweden, we'd have it on Facebook Messenger, or a lot of organizations are using Microsoft Teams. So it's about augmenting of what channels do you use for your current conversations, rather than making someone move to a new app or a new channel. And I think this is one of the great things and worth thinking about when you're thinking about AI that you're bringing in. People don't necessarily want another app. They don't want additional technology, but they've got technology that's currently working for them. Let's augment with inside that. And let's actually kind of create these relationships through this augmentation. And David, I know you've heard this story before, but there's many, like even just tiny little nuances where you can see from the conversation flows that people are having with Coach M that they're building a relationship, whether it's the happy Christmas or, you know, thanks for today, or just those little nuances. You can see that people are stepping in with that relationship, and people actually step into their own social norms. And yes, and we spoke about this whole thing, actually, let's get people booking the personal appointments with this time, so it becomes not just something that they do ad hoc. And of course they can rebook, they can reschedule, or they can actually just message start and get going in any ad hoc moment. This is, I think, one of the challenges that we have got with AI is, and David, maybe it's a little bit to your point, in that the early days, perhaps things came on too quickly and people had bad experiences. Certainly there was another study, and this was quite a funny one, about people that do people want to have managers that are AI bots? And most people said no. And then when they tried it, most people said they were maybe open to it. So it's, I mean, I'm generalizing with those stats there, but it's fascinating. It's the whole thing. When people actually try it, they kind of get the benefit. We've got to help people kind of get over that resistance to even being open to the idea. But actually, it's just having an experiment, encouraging people to have a play with it and see what use it can bring. And we checked in on earlier that people are talking for 20 to 30 minutes at a time. I'm actually trying to narrow that down slightly to 20, because I just want to make it the most efficient conversation possible. But certainly people then have the option to continue that conversation longer if they want.
Yeah.
I'm gonna keeping an eye on time for us here, David, because I want to be respectful. When you're thinking about AI, I also encourage you to think about hidden benefits. Data is one of those hidden benefits. It might not be the first thing we think of as learning professionals, as it is for some people, but there's definitely data that can be created and generated through whatever type of AI you choose, and particularly within chatbots. I'm just going to whiz through here. It's fascinating to actually then start to get the data about the inputs and outputs that are happening. 4 is just keep experimenting, playing with different ideas. David, we did a lot of experimentations, and it's taken, you know, we even experiment with different ways that we do action planning, whether you have split action plans, multiple action plans. One of the things about kind of an AI is that it's not static. It's not like a website that you might put out there and then you don't update it for 2 or 3 years, unless you're updating your particular page, or maybe that's just me having poor website practice. An AI is almost like, you know, I think of Coach M as a living member of our team that we just kind of keep nurturing and nourishing and keep upgrading the whole time. So think about your experiments, and one thing will lead to another, and it will become kind of a constant journey. I love this quote that someone said about Coach M. You feel the freedom of your thoughts without being judged. So for me, that's the whole essence of getting people slowing down, reflecting, and holding themselves accountable to change. My final was don't limit yourself. David, you're probably thinking, Emma, that's rich coming from you. Mrs. Cautious.
Yeah, right.
But as you know, one of the things I'm challenging people to think about now, your next coach is a chatbot. Is it ridiculous or reasonable? I'd say open our minds and let's go, actually, this can be reasonable. All sorts of things are possible here. So David, what surprised you most about today? I know you and I have spoken multiple times, but what surprised you most about today? These are a couple of things that people have said they were surprised by within Coach M.
Well, it still surprises me that somebody will chat for 20 minutes, right? And then, on a side note, it surprises me that you want to take that down from 30 to 20 minutes, right? Just to be mindful of people's productivity. I just don't, it's so far out of my character that I have a tough time imagining it, right? But I think that when I really look at the overall, loss of learning transfer, right? And by the way, in all fairness, I don't think we talked about that as much as we could have, right? And so, at a high level, and you're much better, you're a published author of 2 books, give us the 1 minute stat of, how long does it take before you leave a conference, before you lost X percentage of what you learned, right? And so that's a cue. You're supposed to help me out there.
Well, sorry, the stat I look at, I don't look at retention, because that's a lot about retention. I actually look at application of learning, and the stats is application around 10 to 20%. That when you then go with follow-up, we know we're getting an 80% uplift on people's goals, 70 to 80%. But we also know that we're getting a differential of people saying, hey, I'm actively putting into place 30 to 40% more than I would have done if I hadn't had any follow-up at all. So we know that we're getting people to change their behaviors. And David, this whole thing about the person having the conversation with themselves, it's actually a quality conversation. And that's why people have it, because they're enjoying it and they are putting they're learning through that conversation because of what they're saying. And you can see that when you read it. So
no, that's incredible. That's incredible. So really, to go back about, and you always take me to the next level, as far as my thought. So I was hoping for a little stat that, and then you come up with, no, we measure, things based off of what's done. It's brilliant. Your mind is a wonderful thing. But to me, I just look at this and I think, if I'm a corporate HR person or director or VP of training, and I've put how many people through a program at, what, 1,500 minimum to $5,000, it's to not invest in some sort of retention or follow-up to make sure that you're getting the bang for your dollar is crazy to me, after knowing you and knowing the work that you've done, right? It just makes so much sense. I don't understand how companies could, it's almost, what's that expression, right? We've checked the box, right? Do you want to check a box or do you want results, right? And so that's the way I look at, really what you've done here, right? Is trying to make everything so that you get results, that your desired results, right?
And David, you just brought that to correct point, because we've been talking today about AI, but I always say it's not about the AI, it's about the business problem that you're trying to solve. Right. And so we've got, even though we've got to get excited, we've got to learn, we've got to experiment, we've got to make sure that it's not about the shiny thing. It's actually about saying, well, what's the value it's bringing and what is the problem we're trying to solve within the organization using this technology?
Right.
And so I would invite people. I'm happy to chat with people. There's different ways. People, you can create things straight from scratch. You can partner with people. You can buy things off the shelf and then customize. And we are, we're really open to talking to people about, our product, Coach M, and just sharing the results and actually helping people see what it can do for them as a way to softly kind of get into that AI space. So
yeah. You're it's brilliant. And for people that don't know, Emma's had a bit of a I would say a hidden US presence. She had a really wonderful partnership with a big training company that sort of had her under the thumb with exclusivity. And
they had me as their secret weapon, David.
That's right. And that is no longer a partnership.
Yeah.
Well, it's still a partnership, but you don't have the exclusivity. So I'm saying this now, write the name down. In 5 years, it'll be a fairly common name in the training and development space in this state. So you're brilliant. Yeah.
I've really enjoyed chatting today. I hope this is of value to people and that there's some takeaways. And I'd really encourage people to just reach out and ask more questions and chat and have a conversation.
Yeah, we'll get a copy of this out to everybody if that's okay, and certainly I'll do some introductions to people that are on and people that you didn't make it, and really, I think that we should make sure that some training vendors get a hold of this and take a look and become a good option for your partners too. So.
We will. Wonderful. Yep. Thank you, David. Thank you, everyone.
All right. Good. Have a wonderful day. And thanks everybody for joining us. And hopefully we didn't beat you up too badly with the Zoom fatigue.
Right. Good stuff. Take care. Bye.
Thanks. Bye now.